Hi.
It started slowly, like a drip from a leaky faucet, but eventually, I could see the whole sink was flooded. At first, it didn't seem like much. I noticed Melissa, my wife, had been getting more distant. Her eyes weren't really on me anymore, not like before. She'd get home from work, kiss me on the cheek, and then immediately retreat to the bedroom, either to work on her laptop or scroll through her phone. I told myself it was just the stress from her job. She'd always been a career-focused person, and I respected that. But, over time, the little things started piling up. We'd made plans for dinner with friends one weekend, something we'd been looking forward to, but then she canceled last minute. She said she had to stay late at work, which I understood, until it happened again the next week, and then the week after that. I tried not to overthink it. You know, the usual self-talk like, I'm just being paranoid, and she's just busy. But the more it happened, the more I started feeling like I was just a stranger living in the same house as her. Then one night, it all came crashing down. We were at a dinner with friends, and it wasn't like our usual nights. It was supposed to be fun, catching up, a little bit of wine, just us and a few old friends. We were having a good time, or so I thought, when Melissa, almost out of nowhere, dropped the bomb. We were all talking about how we'd been doing, and one of our friends jokingly asked how things were going at home. I don't remember the exact words she used, but Melissa casually said, "Oh, things are fine, you know. We're basically roommates at this point." She laughed, but I didn't. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Roommates? That's what we'd become in her eyes? I remember sitting there, frozen. My stomach twisted into knots. It wasn't funny, it wasn't casual. It was a dagger in my chest, and I could feel the blood draining from my face. She didn't even seem to notice the weight of her words. Her friends, oblivious to my shock, chuckled along. I didn't know what to say. It wasn't something I could laugh off. She was looking at me like she was waiting for a joke, but all I could do was stare at her, trying to figure out when exactly she stopped seeing me as more than just someone who shared a home with her. It wasn't just the comment. It was everything leading up to it. The canceled dates, the constant work, the way she'd become so wrapped up in herself, leaving me in the background. But hearing her say it out loud, in front of everyone, made everything real. That's when the seed of doubt was planted. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. It hurt, more than I was ready to admit, but I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this was the beginning of the end. I didn't say anything at the dinner. I couldn't, not when everyone else was acting like everything was normal. I forced a smile, tried to laugh, but it was all just a mask to hide the storm brewing inside me. The worst part? I didn't know where to go from there. Should I confront her then and there, or should I let it go and let it all simmer until I had the courage to face the truth? I didn't know. But I knew one thing, this was going to change everything. The days after that dinner were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had snapped between us. It wasn't just her comment anymore, it was the way she moved through the house like a ghost, passing me by without a second glance. I'd catch her staring at her phone more often than not, smiling at something that wasn't me. There were nights she'd get up and go to the bathroom, and I'd hear her typing, her fingers dancing over the screen in the middle of the night. She'd shut the bathroom door behind her, like it was some kind of secret, and that's when the little alarms in my head started going off. I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was just being paranoid. But there was this feeling in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't ignore. The more she pulled away, the more I started to notice the small things, the tiny lies, the unexplained absences, the times she'd come home late and say, work ran longer than expected. But I didn't buy it. Not anymore. One evening, it was clear something was off. She came home late again, around 11:30, after texting me all night about how busy she was. I hadn't heard from her in hours, and when she came in, she barely looked at me. She just tossed her keys on the counter and went straight to the bedroom. I followed her, and when I asked how her day had gone, she gave me the same tired response, busy, you know how it is. But I noticed the change in her eyes. There was a distance there, like she was somewhere else entirely. I could feel the tension between us, the way we used to be able to talk about anything now feeling like a chore. That night, after she had fallen asleep, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, questioning everything. Was I imagining things? Was this just a phase? Or was something else going on? I had this gnawing feeling that I had to know the truth, but I wasn't sure I was ready for it. Then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. It was a message from a mutual friend, John, who had been noticing things too. He texted me, "Hey man, I don't want to overstep, but I've noticed Melissa acting different lately. She's been spending a lot of time with a guy from work. I don't know if you've seen it, but I thought I should let you know." That hit like a freight train. John was someone I trusted. He wouldn't make something up, and I knew he wouldn't say anything if he didn't believe it. But at that moment, I felt a rage bubbling up inside me, anger, confusion, and a deep sense of betrayal. I had to know more, but I didn't know how to confront her. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, but the other part of me, well, the part that was still holding on to the belief that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong, was telling me to wait, to get more proof. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't keep ignoring the signs. The next few days were a blur of silence. Melissa was colder than usual, more absorbed in her work. I would try to talk to her about simple things, but it felt like I was talking to a wall. She would answer with short replies, or just nod along to whatever I was saying, her mind clearly elsewhere. I felt completely invisible. It wasn't just the physical distance. It was like there was an emotional wall between us that I couldn't break through. And as much as I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, deep down, I knew it wasn't. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to confront her. I couldn't keep living in this weird limbo, unsure of what was real anymore. But the question remained, how would I even begin? How do you confront your partner when you're not even sure what they're doing behind your back? I couldn't take it anymore. The silence, the suspicion, it was eating me alive. I had to confront Melissa, but I wasn't sure where to start. How do you ask your wife if she's cheating without sounding crazy? That night, after she came home late again, I couldn't hold it in. I stood in front of her while she was on the couch, staring at her phone. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice steady, but my chest was tight. She blinked at me, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The guy from work. John told me you've been spending a lot of time with him." I could feel the anger building in me. "Don't lie." For a moment, she said nothing. She just stared at me, and then she finally said, "What? No, there's nothing between us." But I didn't buy it. "I know, Melissa. I know you're hiding something. People are talking. I want the truth." She let out a shaky breath, her defenses slipping. "Okay, fine. It's not what you think. We've just been talking about work, nothing more." But I could see it in her eyes. The way she avoided my gaze. It wasn't nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "Are you seeing him? I need to know." She shook her head, barely above a whisper. "No, I'm not. But I've been feeling disconnected from you. I've been lonely." Lonely? That was her excuse? I felt my blood boil. "You're telling me you're talking to him because I haven't been around?" She nodded, eyes brimming with tears. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't know anymore." I stared at her, feeling crushed. The woman I thought I knew was slipping away, and it hurt more than I could express. But the truth was clear, this wasn't a small problem, it was betrayal. I didn't know what to do next. I wanted to scream, to yell, but I was numb. I had to face it, though. We couldn't keep going like this. It was over, and I had to decide if I was ready to let go or keep fighting for a marriage that was already gone. The days after the confrontation were a blur of silence. Melissa and I barely spoke. She'd tried to apologize here and there, but I couldn't bring myself to listen anymore. Her words didn't feel sincere, they felt like a way to avoid the real issue. That first night, I slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling, unsure of what I was feeling. Anger, betrayal, confusion? All of it mixed together in a storm that wouldn't settle. I couldn't even look at her the same way. The love I thought we had felt like a distant memory now. She tried to talk a few times, but each time she spoke, it felt like more excuses and less action. "I'm sorry, I didn't know how to handle everything," she'd say. But it didn't matter. She had already chosen someone else, and hearing her apologies only made it worse. A few days later, she sat down with me again, looking more desperate. "I don't want us to end like this. I want to fix things," she said, offering counseling or anything that would make me believe her. But I couldn't. I had already seen enough. "Melissa, you've been choosing him all along," I said. "And now you want me to pretend nothing happened? I can't do that." Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to care. "You hurt me too much," I said. "I don't know if I can trust you again." She apologized, but it felt empty. I wasn't looking for apologies anymore. I needed her to acknowledge what she had done, but she couldn't. I left the kitchen, retreating to the guest room. I couldn't face her anymore. The distance between us was too wide. The pain too deep. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I didn't know if we could fix this, or if I even wanted to. The trust was broken, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be rebuilt. It didn't take long for the realization to hit me. I couldn't keep living like this. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, the bed empty beside me, wondering how we had gotten here. The woman I loved was now a stranger, someone I couldn't recognize, and the emotional distance between us had turned into something I couldn't ignore. Melissa kept trying to talk, kept offering more apologies, but the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. She wasn't the same person I married. She was someone who had made a choice, and I wasn't sure I could live with the consequences. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was numb. I was tired of being second place. Tired of living in this toxic limbo. I had been holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. The next time she came to me, her eyes were full of hope, but I couldn't meet her gaze. I know I've messed up, but I still love you. Can we try? Can we fix this? I shook my head, feeling a lump in my throat. I can't. I've been trying for months, Melissa. I can't keep doing this. It's not just what you did, it's how you've treated me all this time. I could see her face fall, and part of me hated myself for being the one to say it, but the other part knew it was necessary. We couldn't go on like this. I think it's over, I said quietly, the words feeling heavy as I said them out loud. I can't keep fighting for something that isn't there. Her face crumbled, and I could see the hurt in her eyes, but I was done. I needed to walk away, for my own sanity. I needed to stop hurting. I needed to stop feeling like I was the one holding everything together while she had already checked out. Melissa didn't argue. She didn't beg me to stay. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with guilt and regret, and I could see that she knew I was right. The trust was gone. We were both just holding on to a version of the past that didn't exist anymore. I walked away that night, my heart heavy but finally at peace with the decision. The pain didn't go away, but the weight of uncertainty lifted. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew there would be more heartbreak ahead. But at least now, I was free. Free from the lies, the hurt, and the constant guessing. It was time to let go. And that was the hardest part of all. The weeks after I left were a blur of loneliness and painful clarity. Moving out wasn't planned, but once I made the decision, there was no turning back. Packing up my things felt like leaving behind pieces of my life, and the apartment, once a home, now felt empty and suffocating. Melissa didn't fight me when I said I was leaving. The silence between us after that decision was deafening. She apologized again and again, but each apology felt empty, like band-aids over a wound that couldn't heal. The first few nights alone were the hardest. The silence in the apartment felt suffocating. No laughter. No casual conversations. Just me, my thoughts, and the pain. I kept busy at work, avoiding the emptiness at home. My friends noticed the change and checked in, but I didn't know how to explain what had happened. How do you condense years of hurt into a few words? Melissa texted a few times, wanting to talk, but I ignored her. I was tired of hearing sorry. I didn't need words anymore. I needed peace. A month later, I was starting to find my rhythm. I picked up old hobbies, went to the gym, and spent more time with friends. Slowly, the weight in my chest lightened. I wasn't happy yet, but I was healing. Then, one evening, a text from her popped up. I realize what I've lost. I'm sorry for everything. I don't know if you'll forgive me, but I am sorry. I didn't respond. Part of me wanted to, but I knew I couldn't go back. I had to keep moving forward, no matter how much it hurt. I left her text unread. Melissa was a part of my past now. And sometimes, moving on isn't about fixing things or finding someone new, it's about learning to live with the hurt and finding peace within yourself. The weeks turned into months, and I started to feel like myself again. It wasn't easy. There were still moments where the weight of everything hit me, seeing a couple at the store, hearing a song we used to listen to together, or catching a glimpse of her face in old pictures. But each time, the sting faded a little more. I was learning how to breathe without that constant knot in my stomach. I'd finally gotten into a routine. Work, gym, and catching up with friends. It felt good to do things just for me, without worrying about anyone else. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd given up while trying to make things work with Melissa. It wasn't until I was alone that I realized I had to rebuild, not just my life, but my confidence and my peace of mind. I started dating again, though I wasn't in any rush. The thought of getting into something serious felt like too much, but I went on a few dates here and there, just to see if I was ready. Each time, I'd remind myself not to compare the new person to Melissa. The pain of betrayal had made me cautious, but I knew I couldn't keep hiding forever. Slowly, I began to trust again, but on my own terms. One day, while I was out with a friend, I ran into her. Melissa. I froze when I saw her, and she looked just as surprised to see me. We stood there for a moment, a quiet tension between us, both of us unsure of what to say. She spoke first. I heard you were doing better. There was a hint of sadness in her voice, but it was different now. I could see the change in her. She wasn't the same person I had once known, and neither was I. I nodded, giving a small, neutral smile. Yeah, I'm good. It's been a process. She nodded, looking down for a second before looking back at me. I know I messed up. And I regret it every day. I felt a pang of old hurt, but it wasn't as sharp as before. I had moved on. I had to. I know, I said simply. But I've let it go. I'm not angry anymore. I've just moved on. There was a long silence between us. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. There was no need for words. We were both finally accepting what had happened and where we were. We said goodbye shortly after. It wasn't some big closure. It was just two people who had once been close, now standing at different places in their lives. And for the first time, I felt free of it. Free of the pain, the betrayal, and the need for answers. Moving on wasn't a straight line. There were still moments of doubt, still echoes of what had been, but I was okay. I had finally started to heal, and I realized that sometimes, the hardest thing is to just let go and trust that life will eventually lead you to where you need to be. Time marched on, and with each passing day, I felt more and more like my old self again. I stopped looking over my shoulder, stopped waiting for a call, stopped wondering if there was something I had missed. Melissa's face didn't haunt me like it used to. The memories were still there, but they no longer had the power to control me. I had learned how to let go. I focused on building new routines, things I could do just for me, without the weight of the past holding me back. I joined a few social groups, met people who were outside of the circles I had once known. It was liberating, and honestly, it was just what I needed to remind myself that there was a world out there beyond the hurt. Dating again felt like a slow but steady journey. I met someone after a few months. Her name was Emma, and she was nothing like Melissa. We hit it off easily, but more importantly, I felt safe with her. I didn't have to pretend to be okay. She didn't need me to be perfect. I could just be myself, and that was the kind of connection I had longed for. We took it slow, something I had never done before. It was refreshing. I was still cautious, still carrying the scar of what had happened, but with Emma, it didn't feel like a burden. She was patient, understanding, and didn't rush anything. It was nice to just enjoy someone's company without expecting them to fix all the broken pieces of me. A few months into dating, I found myself looking back on everything, on the pain, the betrayal, the hurt, and I realized I had grown. I had become stronger in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't the same person I was when I first found out about Melissa's affair. That man felt like a stranger now, someone I no longer recognized. And in that realization, I felt a sense of peace I had been chasing for so long. I learned that closure doesn't always come from conversations or apologies. Sometimes, it comes from within. From the decision to heal, to forgive, not for them, but for myself. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had happened. It was about freeing myself from the grip of resentment and giving myself the space to move forward. One evening, Emma and I were walking in the park, talking about everything and nothing, and I caught myself smiling, genuinely smiling. I realized that for the first time in a long while, I was truly happy. Not because I had moved on completely from everything, but because I had learned how to live with it. I had found peace in the broken pieces. And maybe that was the real lesson: life goes on. It doesn't always go the way you plan, but it doesn't have to be the end of your story. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of something new. Something better. Something you didn't even know you were capable of finding. Time had a way of healing, even when I didn't think it could. The first few months after everything fell apart, I couldn't imagine feeling normal again, but now I was starting to see the good in what had been a painful journey. I had lost so much, but I was learning that what I thought I'd lost was just making space for something better. Emma and I were growing closer, and I realized there was no rush with us. No pressure, no comparing her to Melissa, no second guessing. We'd spend time just enjoying each other's company, talking about everything and nothing. It felt real, like a fresh start. One weekend, we took a spontaneous trip to the coast. The ocean, the fresh air, it was exactly what I needed. Walking along the beach, I had a moment of clarity. I wasn't stuck in the past anymore. I wasn't broken. I was free. Later that night, while sitting by a fire pit, Emma said, "I'm really glad we did this." I looked at her, feeling the weight of how far I'd come. "I'm glad too," I replied. "I've been through a lot, but I think I'm finally where I need to be." I realized then that I didn't need to erase the past to move forward. It had shaped me, but it didn't define me. I was stronger, more at peace, and ready for whatever came next. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to live it. As the months passed, I started to feel like I was truly living again. I had made peace with my past, and I wasn't constantly weighed down by what had happened with Melissa. Emma and I kept building something real, but it was different this time. It wasn't rushed or forced. It was easy, comfortable, and felt like a relationship where I didn't have to worry about being betrayed. One evening, after a quiet dinner at my place, Emma and I sat on the couch, just talking. It wasn't anything deep, just sharing thoughts about work, life, and random plans for the future, but it felt natural. For the first time, I found myself thinking about a future without fear, without the doubts that had crept into my mind during my marriage. I wasn't living in the shadow of past mistakes. Emma made me feel like I could finally trust again, and while I wasn't rushing to make big commitments, I knew I was on the right path. I realized that the pain of the past had taught me valuable lessons, about self-worth, about healing, and most importantly, about what I deserved in a relationship. I didn't expect everything to be perfect, but for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. I was finally learning that life wasn't about erasing the past, but about embracing the future, even if it was still a little uncertain. The pieces of my life were slowly falling into place. I wasn't fully healed yet, but I could see the path forward. I had come so far, and I could feel it in my bones. This was just the beginning of something better. I'd spent so much time in the past, wondering what went wrong, questioning what I could have done differently. But slowly, it began to dawn on me that sometimes, things just don't work out, no matter how hard you try. And that was okay. Letting go wasn't about forgetting, it was about accepting what had happened and moving forward. Emma and I were still taking things one day at a time, but for the first time, I wasn't holding on to old baggage. I had learned how to set it down and trust that I could be happy without it. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop or for something to go wrong. I was just present. For the first time in years, I was living in the moment. One day, Melissa reached out again. I debated whether to respond, but I already knew the answer. She hadn't changed, and whatever apologies she had left, I didn't need to hear them. I had moved on. I had done the work to heal. I didn't need to look back anymore. I responded simply, "I'm in a good place now. I hope you find yours too." And that was it. I deleted the thread and felt a strange sense of finality. I wasn't angry or sad. I was just done, and that felt liberating. Emma and I took a weekend trip to a cabin in the mountains, just to get away. We talked about everything, our goals, dreams, and what we wanted from life. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't about moving forward with a timeline. It was just about enjoying each other and the possibilities ahead. As I sat there, looking at the mountains, I realized something important. Life had a way of working itself out. I'd been through a lot, but I was stronger for it. I wasn't who I was before all of this, but in some ways, that was a good thing. I had found myself again, and I knew whatever came next, I could handle it. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer had a hold on me. It was time to look ahead. The best chapters of my life were just beginning. It felt like the next step in my life had finally arrived. After everything that happened with Melissa, I used to think I'd never feel whole again. That the hurt would always follow me around like a shadow. But with each passing day, it became clearer that the future didn't have to be defined by the past. I wasn't the same person anymore, but I wasn't broken either. I was learning to embrace this version of myself, the one that had been through so much and had come out stronger on the other side. Emma and I had been seeing each other more regularly. It wasn't just about filling a gap left by someone else, it was about building something real. We talked about everything, our ambitions, what we wanted out of life, and where we saw ourselves in the future. She didn't rush me, and I didn't push her. It felt easy and honest, like two people just connecting, no expectations, no games. It was refreshing. One afternoon, we were walking through a park, enjoying the weather, when Emma turned to me and said, "You know, I'm really happy right now. I feel like we're really in sync." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd missed. "Me too," I said. "It feels like we're building something real, something that feels right." And it did. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells, waiting for something to go wrong. I wasn't carrying around old baggage or haunted by memories of betrayal. I could just be. With her. With myself. And that was a relief I hadn't known I needed. A few weeks later, we made plans for a trip together. It wasn't anything big, just a few days away to visit a city we'd both wanted to explore. It felt like a new chapter, one that didn't have to be rushed or complicated. I wasn't thinking about the past. I was just focused on what was ahead. As we sat on the plane, heading to our destination, I looked out the window and realized that for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. The pain from the past was there, but it didn't define me anymore. I had let go. And now, I was ready for whatever came next. This wasn't the end of my story, it was just the beginning. And I couldn't wait to see where the journey would take me. The trip with Emma was everything I needed and more. It was simple, a chance to unwind, explore, and enjoy each other's company without the pressures of daily life. We wandered through the city, tried new foods, laughed at the little things, and just existed in the moment. It felt like a new kind of happiness, one that was built on trust, respect, and the freedom to be ourselves. It made me realize how much I had been holding back before, how much of my life had been defined by fear of what had happened in the past. But with Emma, there was no judgment. There was no looking over my shoulder, wondering if I'd made the right choice. We were building something, and it felt good. I had stopped thinking about Melissa. For the first time, the past felt like something that belonged where it should, behind me. The scars were there, but they weren't as raw anymore. I could finally see them for what they were, marks of survival. I had been through something tough, but I had come out the other side stronger. The man I was now was more aware of his worth, more intentional with his actions, and more willing to open up to the people who truly mattered. One evening, while we were sitting by a quiet cafe, Emma turned to me with a smile. "I'm really glad we met," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "I don't think I've ever felt this comfortable with someone before." My heart skipped a beat, but not out of fear. It was a quiet confirmation that this was right, that this was real. I hadn't expected to be here, happy, open, and ready for whatever came next, but here I was. "I feel the same way," I said, holding her gaze. "I think we've got something special." We didn't need to say anything more. In that moment, I realized that I didn't need to rush anything. Life had a way of unfolding when the time was right, and for the first time, I was content to let it happen naturally. As we walked back to our hotel that night, hand in hand, I couldn't help but think about how far I had come. I had been broken, but I had rebuilt. The pain, the betrayal, all of it, it had shaped me, but it didn't control me anymore. I was finally free, and the road ahead, though uncertain, felt full of possibilities. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to face it. The next chapter was waiting, and I was ready to step into it, one step at a time. As time passed, I noticed something I hadn't expected: peace. Not the kind of peace you get from avoiding the hard stuff, but the kind that comes from facing it head on and learning to live with it. The kind of peace that doesn't mean everything is perfect, but that you've made your peace with the things that hurt and made the choice to move forward anyway. Emma and I continued to grow, but we were doing it at our own pace. There were no big milestones we were racing toward, no pressure to have everything figured out right away. We enjoyed the simplicity of each day. Simple conversations over dinner, shared looks in the middle of the night, and the comfort of knowing we were both in this for the right reasons. It wasn't about fixing each other, it was about being whole on our own and choosing to share that wholeness together. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried about history repeating itself. The fears that had once held me back were slipping away, replaced by a quiet confidence. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. One afternoon, we were sitting in the park, just talking about random things, nothing important, when Emma turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about the future? What it'll look like?" I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I do. But I think I've learned that it doesn't have to be planned. It just happens." She smiled. "I like that." I smiled back, realizing she was right. I didn't have to know every step. I didn't need to have it all figured out. For once, I was okay with the uncertainty. The future wasn't something to be feared, it was something to be embraced, one moment at a time. That evening, as we sat together watching the sunset, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. The past would always be part of my story, but it no longer had a hold on me. I had worked through the pain, and now, I was ready for whatever came next. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And I was finally at peace with it. It's funny how, when you stop chasing the future so hard, it starts to unfold in ways you couldn't have imagined. The past had its place, and I'd learned to honor it, but I had also learned that it didn't define me anymore. It had shaped me, yes, but it didn't control me. I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward, and it felt damn good. Emma and I had started talking more seriously about our future, but we weren't putting pressure on ourselves. We'd take trips, talk about where we might want to live, what we wanted out of life, but always with the understanding that it was about the journey, not a destination. It was easy, it was real, and it felt right. One night, while we were out having dinner, I found myself thinking about how far I'd come. From the devastation of betrayal to the peace I had now, it was hard to believe how much had changed. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I had forgiven, not for Melissa, but for myself. I had found peace within, and that made everything else so much clearer. "Do you ever think about how much we've changed?" I asked Emma, a small smile on my face. She paused, glancing up at me. "I do. I think about how much we've both been through, and how much we've grown. I like where we are." I took her hand across the table. "Me too. I think we've got something really good." Her smile softened, and for a moment, I could feel the unspoken understanding between us. We didn't have to have everything figured out. We just had to keep moving forward, together. That night, as we walked back to the car, the future didn't feel uncertain or scary anymore. It felt full of possibilities. There would be bumps along the way, of course, life always throws those at you, but for the first time in a long time, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. With Emma by my side, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And I was finally excited to see where the road would take us. The next chapter was just beginning, and this time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready to embrace it, one step at a time.
Bye.